Yeah, so weighted representative democracy is a different system of representative democracy. The basic idea is that there are a bunch of candidates who want to be part of the government. They don't necessarily belong to any political party. They don't necessarily identify with any particular region of the country. They're just free-floating candidates. And each voter can choose any one of those candidates as her representative, as her delegate. And when she does that, she basically delegates her vote to that candidate. And then all these candidates get together and they form the parliament. And decisions in the parliament are made by a weighted voting rule, where the weight of each person in the parliament is the number of voters who delegated their votes to her. So if, I don't know, 10,000 people delegate their votes to me, then I get a weight of 10,000. If 25,000 people delegate their votes to somebody else, they get a weight of 25,000. And in this way, each point of view in the country, each ideology, each demographic group gets a representation exactly in proportion to its size. So it's a perfectly proportional representative system. And the advantage of the system is that unlike other political systems, you don't need to have political parties. You can have political parties. You're not prevented, but you don't need them. They're not an essential part of the system. You don't need to divide the country up into regions, so you don't have to worry about all the politics of gerrymandering of district boundaries and things like that. So it avoids a lot of the major problems of other systems of representative democracy, such as proportional representation or regional representation or hybrid of the two, such as, for example, what's used in Chile right now is what's called the regional don't method. The drawback is it's a relatively new system. It has never been tried in practice on a large scale, and so it might have drawbacks we don't know about, right? I mean, I would say to anybody who's thinking about any kind of constitutional reform, you basically have two choices. You can try using one of the existing systems which are out there. Those systems are fairly well understood, but we also know that they all have problems. You can try using a totally new system which promises great things, but then you're taking a risk that it might have unanticipated shortcomings. That means any major change to the Constitution should come with what we call in English a sunset clause. That means after some period of time, say 10 years, it automatically is terminated unless there's a referendum to continue it. So the population gets a period of, I'll say 10 years to decide, do we like this change? And if after 10 years they hold a referendum and they don't vote to keep it, it's gone. So that means you can experiment with different constitutional models without a risk of being sucked into some terrible system that you can't get out of. I'd say the biggest challenge that we face in the mathematical social sciences is massive underdetermination of theory by data. So in other words, there are lots and lots of good theories out there. They all seem plausible. It's difficult to get enough precise data to figure out which theory is right. The correct description of any social phenomenon probably involves a lot of parameters. And then you have to find ways to find the values of all of those parameters. And so, I mean, if you have a model which has 50 parameters, it's very difficult to identify them, and that basically means that you can never really apply the model to actual prediction. And so because of that, what tends to happen is that the mathematical social sciences, in particular economics, have had a strong preference for very parsimonious models, what physicists call spherical cow models. And those are attractive because they don't have lots of parameters. However, they have the disadvantage that they're often not very realistic descriptions. And so you can end up drawing some very incorrect policy conclusions by trying to describe social phenomena using a spherical cow model. Mathematical modeling is a trade-off between descriptive accuracy and tractability. Okay, so there are two kinds of tractability. I mean, as a mathematician, we think about analytic tractability. That basically means, can you actually mathematically prove things about your model? Can you do the computations? Can you prove theorems? Can you understand what the model is telling you? But in the social sciences, there's also this issue of the paucity of data. So there's a lack of data, and so there's another tractability issue, which is basically, can you get enough data to identify the parameters in the model? What I'm saying is that that trade-off is always present in any part of mathematical science. Physics, biology, chemistry, they all face versions of this trade-off. Basically, we just have to find sort of push out on the frontier of what is feasible. I think the people who have advanced the most on that in that direction are the physicists. I think that economists have a lot to learn from physicists. I think that not everything physicists say is applicable to economics, and it's true that sometimes physicists come into economics and say, well, why don't you just do this? And that doesn't really make sense in an economic environment. But nevertheless, I think physicists have a lot of very powerful tools because they've been grappling with exactly these kinds of trade-offs for like 400 years. And so I think that there should be more use of that way of thinking to tackle problems in the mathematical social sciences. I'm not an expert in Chile's economic and social problems, so I mean, I might have an opinion, but it's not a very informed opinion necessarily. I do not claim to be an expert. From what I've read, a lot of the social unrest in Chile is being caused by economic inequality and a sense that the government is not able to adequately assess certain economic problems and not adequately address certain economic problems. So economic inequality is a big problem in many parts of the world. It's a very complicated problem to solve. I mean, economists love talking about trade-offs, so I'm going to talk about a trade-off again. Whenever you set up an economic policy framework, you have to make a trade-off between how much you want to encourage equality and how much you want to encourage economic growth. Chile, I would say for most of the last 30 or 40 years, has been very biased towards, like the Chilean economic policy framework has been very biased towards maximizing economic growth, perhaps at the cost of inequality. Now that's not necessarily the wrong thing to do. It's a choice, which is to some extent a values choice, how you want to make this trade-off. It's plausible that what's happened now is that Chilean society has gone through some kind of a transition where people are more and more becoming unhappy with the increasing inequality, and they're willing to sacrifice some growth in order to have more equality. That's a decision that Chilean society has to make. The role of democratic mechanisms is to help the society make those decisions in a sensible way.